A woman with long dark hair is playfully pinching and stretching Vikir's cheeks, exclaiming with a huge smile how much she's missed her little brother. While Vikir endures this with a pained and annoyed look, his friends, Sancho, Tudor, and Piggy, watch from a distance, completely stunned. Tudor found it unbelievable that Vikir even had a family, and Piggy quietly told him that was rude. Sancho explained their confusion, noting that Vikir had never spoken about himself or his family, making the situation very strange. A flustered Tudor admitted he didn't even know why he was so shocked. The woman continued her overly affectionate act, leaning in very close to Vikir's face and asking if they should share a kiss after being apart for so long. Once Vikir's friends had left, the mood in the room changed completely. Vikir and the woman sat alone at a table. The act now over, he said it seemed everyone was finally gone. The woman, looking tired, rested her head in her hand and said she knew she had to come in person because the message was important. She suddenly winced in pain as an image flashed, showing her face split with Cindy Windy's, showing a red bump on her forehead. The woman complained that no brother in the world would hit his visiting older sister for showing a little affection. However, she quickly added that it was necessary to overact so much to remove any suspicion others might have about their relationship. She then sat back with her legs crossed, looking arrogant, and said he should be grateful she even bothered to visit him. Vikir cut the small talk short, telling her that was enough. He became serious and asked her directly how the trade with the natives of the sea was going. The woman's attitude immediately turned professional as well. She reported that things were going smoothly and that they had already completed 3 large trades. Vikir simply replied that it was good news. Following their business discussion, Vikir's expression turned serious as he began to ask another question. With his red eye glowing, he asked Cindy Windy if there was any news on the whereabouts of the Balak tribe. Cindy Windy closed her eyes and solemnly shook her head, telling him they still hadn't been able to find them. She explained that the tribe used to appear for every trade, but now they had vanished completely. She assured Vikir that they were actively tracking them, while Vikir listened in silence. Vikir considered this information, thinking that something must have happened to the Balak tribe. An image of their powerful, white-haired leader eyes came to his mind. He believed that with such an outstanding leader, he probably didn't need to worry too much about them. Changing the subject, Cindy Windy then presented a large bag to Vikir. She explained that, as he requested, the bag contained war funds. When opened, the bag was revealed to be overflowing with shining gold coins. With that business done, Cindy Windy's expression grew grim. She told Vikir there was one last thing he needed to know. She then revealed the identity of their main target, the head of the bourgeois family, a stern, bearded man named Bartholomew de Bourgeois. With her hands clasped and her own red eyes glowing with intensity, Cindy Windy delivered the critical information. Bartholomew is the demon.
Upon hearing that Bartholomew de Bourgeois is the demon, Bakir clasped his hands and processed the information. He had suspected that the one corrupting Quo Vadis, one of the 7 great families of the empire, would either be the family head or a very close aide. While he had expected this, having it confirmed directly made the weight of the situation feel much heavier. Cindy Windy continued, reminding Vikir that, as he knew, the bourgeois family was the wealthiest in the entire empire. She warned him that even if he wanted to make contact with them, the bag of gold she had brought would be far from enough to get them to even look his way. She offered to bring more funds if he needed them, but Bakir calmly said that this amount would be enough as seed money. Confused, Cindy Windy questioned what he meant by seed money. Bakir explained that one cannot simply make contact with the bourgeois family just by having a lot of money. They are only interested when the method of earning the money is interesting, Only then will they pay any attention. A sly grin spread across Bakir's face as he told her what he planned to do with the money. He revealed his target, the mock investment tournament, an event hosted by the bourgeois family themselves. Holding up a flyer for the competition, Bakir confidently declared his plan to use his knowledge to win the tournament. Hearing this, Cindy Wendy's face twisted in absolute shock, blue lightning crackling around her. She screamed that he was insane, shouting that his plan was nothing short of fraud. The scene shifts to a large, grand building at night. Inside a dimly lit office, a man with long, wavy blue hair named Venzimorg has been called. He enters and asks if he was summoned. The person who called him is a powerfully built man with long blonde hair holding a large, ornate sword. This is Winston Smith, the principal of Colosseo Academy. Venzimorg looks slightly surprised as his eyes fall upon the principal's weapon. He recognizes it as Owl, the Sword of Winter, and notes that since the principal is still armed, he must have just arrived. Venzi thinks about the principal's reputation as a legendary swordsman, a figure whose power was said to match the heads of the most powerful warrior families in the empire. Principal Smith smiles and motions for Venzi to take a seat, saying that his time off ended sooner than expected. Once they are seated, the principal gets straight to the point, asking about the trouble he's heard Professor Sadie has been causing in his absence. Venzi's expression turns to pure anger. He begins listing her offenses, which he claims are too many to even mention in full. He mentions her poor work ethic, her habit of drinking during class, and even attacking students. Leaning forward in frustration, Venzi declares that, to be frank, Sadie isn't a professor, but a criminal who belongs in the notorious Nouvelle Vague prison. The principal raises a hand to calm Venzi down, telling him not to be so harsh, though his own smile seems a bit forced. He then gives some context for Sadie's behavior. He explains that she's the last descendant of the Marquis de Sade, a family that was incredibly infamous before the empire's unification. The principal adds that the previous head of the Sade family is, in fact, currently imprisoned in Nouvelle Vague. Principal Smith addressed Venzi, stating that he still believed there was a good side to everyone, and that this must also be true for Professor Sadie. Venzi, clearly frustrated and thinking the principal was being naive, warned him that the final exams and parent-teacher conferences were fast approaching. He insisted that if Sadie caused problems again, as she did during the midterms, the situation would become completely unmanageable. The principal's solution was simple. He instructed Venzi to exclude her from any practical duties and to keep her out of the public eye as much as possible. Internally, Venzi was fuming with frustration, realizing that the principal had no intention of even considering disciplinary action or dismissal for Sadie. Standing up stiffly, Venzi curtly acknowledged the principal's decision, saying that if that's what he wanted, then it would be done. He then stated that since there was nothing left to discuss, he would take his leave. Venzi turned and walked out of the office, leaving Principal Smith sitting alone in the moonlight, thinking about the situation in silence. The scene shifts to a meeting of the Oracle Mock Investment Club. Piggy rushes in excitedly, holding a large stack of papers, and reports to Dolores that he has gathered all the requested information on the personal details and recent activities of the young masters of the bourgeois family. Meanwhile, Sinclair stands proudly before a chalkboard, announcing that she has completed a perfect analysis of the schedule, system, and structure of the upcoming mock investment tournament. Standing at the head of the table, Dolores, the club's vice president, praises them both for excellent work. A determined glint appears in her eye.
The story flashes back to a secret meeting between Dolores and Bakir, who is disguised as the Night Hound, stunned by the bag of gold coins on the table between them. Dolores asked where he could have possibly gotten so much, and Bakir reminded her that he had mentioned having a very rich friend. He explained that their plan was to use this seed money to earn even more, which would attract the attention of the bourgeois family's leadership. He told her that since he couldn't act in his own identity, it was her role to grow this fortune. He assured her that he would instruct her on the methods for making money later. Bakir had one additional instruction for her. He told her to find 2 capable individuals to handle the clerical, administrative, and other secretarial work so they could proceed with their plans smoothly. Returning to the present, Dolores looks at Piggy and Sinclair, the very people she recruited for this task after they beat out numerous other competitors. She overhears them bickering, with Sinclair correcting Piggy that they beat exactly 108 applicants. A wave of guilt and determination washes over Dolores. She clenches her fist, knowing that these innocent students have no idea they are preparing for a battle against a demon, though she has already put plans in place to protect them from the fallout. She resolves to keep them safe. Piggy then approaches the table and asks a very practical question. He points out that since the mock investment tournament is just a simulation, he wonders why they need real seed money. Leaning forward with a confident, almost mischievous smile, Dolores begins to explain. She reveals that it's because they're going to be making real investments. The revelation leaves both Piggy and Sinclair utterly speechless and shouting in shock. Dolores passionately declared their dual goal. Not only would they win the mock investment tournament, but they would also make a massive financial profit in the process. With a confident smile, she announced that she would take full responsibility for any negative consequences, though she privately knew that the Night Hound was the one truly taking the risk. Piggy and Sinclair huddled together, whispering nervously. Piggy worriedly asked if their vice president could be planning to scam them, but Sinclair quickly dismissed the idea, saying she didn't believe Dolores was that kind of person. After a moment, they turned back to Dolores with bright, trusting smiles. They declared that since she was so determined, they would follow her completely. They even admitted that the idea of using real money sounded much more exciting. Internally, Dolores was filled with gratitude for their unwavering trust. Feeling optimistic, Piggy suggested they should ask his young Bakir to join them. Sinclair immediately agreed, pointing out that having Bakir on their team would be a huge help. The mention of Bakir's name caught Dolores completely off guard, causing a bead of sweat to trickle down her face as she became visibly flustered. Piggy explained that Bakir had recently shown a keen interest in economics, reading the newspaper every morning, and added that Bakir was the kind of reassuring friend who brought a sense of calm just by being present. After a moment of thought, Dolores turned away slightly and asked Piggy to pass a message to Bakir the next time he saw him, an invitation to join their club. While Piggy seemed a little hesitant, Sinclair was overjoyed, pumping her fists and cheering at the idea. Piggy then noticed something about Dolores's expression, remarking that it looked familiar. He recalled that she had the exact same look on her face when she had come to their dorm looking for Bakir some time ago. As if prompted by the memory, Dolores turned and began walking away down a sunlit corridor. She told them to finish organizing the materials and head home, explaining that she had something to take care of and was leaving ahead of them. Sinclair watched her go, a hint of concern on her face. As Dolores walked alone down a sunlit corridor, her mind was completely filled with thoughts of Bakir. She recalled all the times she had wanted to speak with him, but couldn't find the words. She remembered when he asked to name the scholarship after Perry, and how she wished she could have talked with him about it, since he was there for Perry's final moments. She also thought of the time he fought on her behalf, and how he had supported her during the student council election. She realized she had always wanted to simply thank him. Thinking back, she recognized there had been so many opportunities to have a real conversation with him, from their time in the northern forests to the battle against the demon Andromalis, but she had failed to take any of them. She admitted to herself that whenever she was in front of him, she became flustered and couldn't speak properly. Even when she was with the mysterious Night Hound, her thoughts would inevitably drift back to Bakir. Steeling her resolve, she wondered if today would finally be the day she could say what she needed to say. Her thoughts were interrupted when she found herself standing directly in front of Bakir, who looked surprised to see her and asked what was wrong. Taking a deep breath and looking down for a moment to gather her courage, Dolores began to speak his name. Then, with a blush on her cheeks and a look of pure determination in her eyes, she looked directly at him and announced loudly that she had something she needed to tell him. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
It was night, and near the mountains stood the Quo Vadis New Testament Temple Cauter Zodiaci. A carriage arrived, and several men gathered, The bald man spread his hands and with a smile mentioned that it had been a long time and that the Pope seemed to have rejuvenated lately. The long-haired man began to show a smile, while on the other hand, the man carrying a staff noted that the bald man had become quite burly and seemed to be imbued with more divine power. In turn, the bald man replied that the long-haired man, on the contrary, had lost weight, and asked if this was due to the new concubine he had taken. The long-haired man was the Manson cult leader, Charles. Sticking out his tongue, with a smile, he explained that she was a young woman who had a husband, and that, after whispering to her about the liberation of the soul while teaching her the doctrine, she came to him of her own free will. The bald man was the cult leader, He explained with a laugh that with just a word they offered him gold or grain, and because of this there was no need for his body to move. The man wearing a hat and carrying a staff was the New World cult leader, Mani. To him, no one would dare challenge the words of God. He pulled a letter from his hat and began to read it attentively. He mentioned that the fact that the Quo Vadis New Testament had sent an invitation for a communion ceremony made him wonder if this meant they would finally recognize them as a branch. As Am's eyes shone with malice, with a smile he began to rub his hands together. The image of Saint S. Dolores came to his mind. He knew that communion was a ritual to consume bread and white wine, but symbolically it was also the act of sharing the blood and flesh of a virgin. He considered this a clear invitation to form a formal alliance. They began to walk through the area, and with a serene gaze, Charles mentioned that it was fortunate that the New Testament cultists had finally come to their senses and reached out to them. Began to ponder in silence, while on the other hand, Mani turned to them and stated that those people had always acted so nobly, but now they finally understood. They understood that they could never win against the Old Testament cultists without their funds. Just at that moment, an explosion occurred behind them. Noticing this, their eyes widened in surprise and confusion as they didn't know what was happening. They stopped and turned towards the direction of the explosion, trying to understand what had happened. The ground was littered with the remains of the carriage destroyed by the explosion and a corpse. As the smoke screen dissipated, a woman began to walk toward them, happy to have found them. It was none other than Ouroboros. As a powerful energy surged from her body, she stared at them intently, and an excited smile spread across her face as she wondered why so much trash was gathered in this place. In the blink of an eye, guards carrying shields and swords surrounded Ouroboros. At the same time, from a rooftop, Bakir and Dolores were watching everything. Dolores was somewhat surprised, as Ouroboros had appeared just as Bakir had said. Bakir, who was crouching beside her, began to stare intently at Ouroboros in silence. Ouroboros unsheathed her whip. Omin the others approached her, and in a curious tone asked her how she had gotten here. Showing a calm expression and a smile, she explained that she had heard a report about the appearance of the Nightblood Hound. So she came to check it out, but she had only found what she considered a gathering of stinking trash. Hearing this, their eyes widened with rage, and they couldn't help but grit their teeth hard, as they couldn't believe how that insolent bastard dared. As the moon shone high in the sky, they ordered their men to kill her immediately. Hearing the order, they drew their swords, and with a furious gaze began to charge towards her. Once they got a little closer, Ouroboros's eyes began to shine with excitement. Without wasting a single second, she decided it was time to get serious. Just before the guards could react, she moved her whip like a thunderclap, cutting the guards' bodies to pieces. The guards' blood splattered on the faces of Om and the others, and their eyes widened in surprise and fear. They couldn't believe she had killed the guards in a single attack. As the corpses fell from the sky, Ouroboros wiped the blood from her cheek with her finger and with a curious smile asked them if they were their leaders. Ohm began to sweat like crazy and gritted his teeth in fear, not knowing what to say. But just then, Charles extended his hand and asked her to wait, questioning how she dared to act this way in front of them. With an arrogant expression, Charles began to point his finger at her, declaring that he was the god of the Manson cult. He added that now that he thought about it, she seemed to be his type, and that if she became his 21st wife, he would make sure she avoided divine punishment. Just before Charles could finish his sentence, Ouroboros moved like a thunderclap and with a whip crack severed his head, sending it flying through the air. Noticing this, Ohm was paralyzed for fear, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. Ouroboros began to stare intently at Ohm with a piercing gaze, questioning with disdain how it was possible that someone who couldn't even block her attack dared to call himself a god. El-Mani began to look at the ground, and with a furious expression declared that he was not afraid of trash like her. With a determined expression, he began to point his finger at her, declaring that he would never surrender because he was the true God who had descended upon this world. Although deep down he was pissing his pants, Ouroboros threw a bottle which hit El-Mani squarely in the face, causing the liquid to make contact with his skin. With a smile, Ouroboros showed the bottle and asked that if he really was a god, nothing would happen to him, even if he touched holy water. Once the liquid made contact with El-Mani's skin, it began to burn it like acid, causing him to start writhing in pain and screaming in agony. Ouroboros turned the bottle to show the label, which had the symbol for poison. Then she put the bottle away, extended her hand, and with a cheerful smile began to walk towards Ohm, telling him that now he was the only piece of trash left. Ohm began to sweat like crazy and started to back away, begging for his life. He confessed that he was not a god or a priest, but just a cultist, a heretic. Ouroboros began to stare intently at Ohm with an excited smile, and with her so close, Ohm's eyes filled with tears and fear as he pleaded with her to please spare him. She placed her foot next to Ohm's face, revealing that she already knew. Seeing this, Ohm gritted his teeth and panicked, knowing this was not good, as a suffocating aura of energy emanated from Ouroboros' body. In an arrogant tone, she asked him what any of that mattered. Ohm began to scream like a madman, knowing he had no escape. She grew tired of all the talk and gave him what he deserved. Now the ground was filled with blood and corpses. As if nothing had happened, she began to walk through the area. Ouroboros began to carefully observe the corpses, wondering if they planned to use her in this way. She started to look at the ground and couldn't help but smile, hoping to meet him one day. Her eyes began to shine, and sticking out her tongue, she grew excited, as the only one who managed to provoke this in her was none other than the Nightblood Hound. Her thoughts were interrupted when a bright light emerged from the trees in the forest. Voices were heard shouting that they had heard a scream coming from beyond that forest, and this time they would catch her. Hearing this, she snapped out of her thoughts, turned around, felt furious, and gritted her teeth hard. Then she braced herself, and with a leap, disappeared from the place without a trace. On the ground was Ohm, who was still alive, but his body was covered in whip wounds. Writhing in pain, he began to pant heavily. Bakir stood up, and his gaze fixed on Ohm. He explained to Dolores that he would handle the interrogation, so she should find the document containing the information. Dolores began to watch Bakir attentively, in silence. He reached a hand inside his clothes, then descended near Ohm, pulled out the glowing Dicrabia pendant, and as his eyes shone, he demanded that he tell him everything he knew about the financing of these bastards. Once opened his eyes, he saw Dicrabia's glowing eye, and it made it clear that before it, even silence was useless, and that he had to tell him everything he knew. Hypnotized by the power of Dicrabia, began to spit out everything he knew, mentioning a ledger, the financing, and a top-secret document that was located under the carriage. Just then, someone noticed them in front of the temple and shouted to capture them all. Bakir stood up and turned around, while on the other hand, Dolores went on alert, her eyes filled with concern. Dolores felt afraid, and Bakir became alert. He couldn't believe they had arrived so quickly. Not long after, someone carrying a